Hello. Sorry for the delay in videos. I kind of slipped again for another, 2 or 3 weeks. I'm just recovering from the flu, which had all the telltale signs of COVID, including being zonked out for almost a week. But I'm back and ready to make more videos. So I made a PDF called The Reckless Horde to be exact, which is a tribute to my youth in the late 80s, early 90s, when I first experienced fantasy films and games. More specifically, fighting fantasy and Hero Quest. This video is to explain lore, which I have been writing into my D&D sessions and amateur fiction for years. It will focus on what I collectively call the Hob race, which D&D calls goblinoids and Warhammer calls greenskins. So without further ado, let's dive into the categories and what I consider Hobs in my Shadowdark campaign setting, Epics of Empires. The gremlin race has bounced between Fey and goblinoid origins in D&D lore for some time now. They are curious, mischievous little thieves who like ambushing larger humanoids exploring their underground homes. There are about 6 types of gremlins. The best lore video on this diverse race is by AJ Pickett, so I definitely suggest watching that video in depth if you want to know more about the D&D version of the gremlin. It seems that Gygax and Livingston from the Fighting Fantasy and Warhammer universes were both instrumental in formulating the early lore of gremlins. Contrasting their trapping and mugging mentality, my gremlins are more the goblin version of gnomes, tinkerers, but at a lower craftsmanship than the aforementioned. Using the modern World War II method of gremlins destroying things, I flipped it on its head and made them more curious about building things from stolen technology. Whereas the winged gremlins, or critters as I call them, are the destructive ones. This works in tandem, with the critters destroying gnome and dwarven technology and stealing the parts only to give them to the slightly larger gremlin inventors or artificers. Trolls, cyclops and ogres are considered part of the giant race and its hierarchy called the Ordning. In fighting fantasy, conversely, all 3 of these races are related to orcs and goblins, being created by the orc god Hashak, Cyclops even being mentioned as an evolved form of the ogre. In regard to ogres, I have noticed that in the major franchises, they are usually envisioned as giant pale-skinned orcs. For some reason, early Warhammer fantasy made them look like Mongols, not to mention the stereotype of ogres being eternally hungry, man-eating oafs. Fighting fantasy at least broke that stereotype a little by suggesting that some were civilized and others were blacksmiths, which would require more than 2 brain cells to be able to forge a weapon. Even the trolls in fighting fantasy have the eloquence to string these words together.
Who would enter Port Blacksand uninvited? State the nature of your business or go back the way you came.
My ogres are more like larger orcs, with a militaristic mind. They grew larger whilst making their home in the mountains, becoming adept at climbing. Trolls haven't changed much from the D&D lore of being dim-witted with the ability to regenerate hit points. They do have an affinity with gremlins, who tend to use the big meatheads to help them assemble their zany contraptions. The core of my hob lore comes from, as I mentioned before, my youth in the late 80s and early 90s. For some reason, I pondered on the word hob, which was attached to the name hobgoblin. I thought it had a good ring to it and sounded like an umbrella word for the goblins, gremlins, orcs, trolls and ogres. It also reminded me of the orc knobs in 40k. Knobs, hobs. You could easily put a Z instead of an S at the end and make it sci-fi. Below you'll find a link to the Reckless Horde ebook, which covers a brief history on the Hob race, including 34 monster stat blocks that includes the basic goblinoid races from the Shadowdark bestiary. I did slightly change some of them, like making the orc level 2 instead of 1, and giving the hobgoblin, ogre and bugbear other talents. In my world, hobs were originally created by Furos, the god of war. However, during the time of the God Wars, when the Pantheon made war against each other for supremacy, the land that would later become Drakand was corrupted by Kult, the god of chaos. He poured his corrupting power into the soil, which caused plants and wildlife to wither and die, and living creatures to mutate. This included the Hob progenitor race, which was fractured by the dark power. From them came the various subraces, But the first were the hobgoblins, who carry the ancestral name in their identity. The others, such as ogres, orcs, goblins, trolls, gremlins, and cyclops, would branch from them and evolve or devolve in different environments. The orcs on the plains, the ogres in the mountains, and the goblins in the caves. However, it would be the ogres who would reign supreme over the others due to their brute strength and willpower. This further expansion of the Hob subraces would grow when the Ogre Emperor established the Chaos Pits beneath the capital city of the Hobs, Thul Core. But you'll need to download the PDF to learn more. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe as it helps this channel grow. But until next time,